Criminals. Brutal, elusive, merciless. They thought they could hide, but justice still found them. And you know who's the most terrifying? The gang leaders who kept entire cities in fear for years. They're not just criminals, they're real monsters.
My name is Knox, and today you'll learn how these villains finally paid for their deeds.
High-profile trials, secrets exposed, and inevitable retribution. And at the end, I'll show you perhaps the most deranged gang leader in the world. Simon Duran, brutal murder and just sentence. In 2018, the quiet town of Lakewood woke up to a nightmare. The disappearance of Simon Duran, a young mother, shocked everyone. Her children waited by the window, but she never came home. Soon the police discovered that the person behind her disappearance was none other than Abel Gago, a cold-blooded gang leader who used social media to gain her trust. Gago, along with his accomplices Alfonso Quintana and René Rosales, meticulously planned the crime. Simon's trust in his friendliness became her fatal mistake. The investigation revealed the horror of their plan.
They didn't just kill her, they destroyed her life to demonstrate their power.
In court, the evidence was so overwhelming that the criminals couldn't utter a word in their defense. All three were sentenced to life in prison. Ironically, the internet, which they had used as a tool of deception, became the trap that led to their capture. The tragedy ended, but life would never be the same for her children. How will Lakewood move on? The fate of a gang leader in San Antonio. San Antonio. Neon lights, nightclubs, and secret dealings between criminals took center stage. One of these behind-the-scenes players was a gang leader who lured a 19-year-old young man under the pretext of buying drugs. But things went wrong. First a conversation, then threats, and then a gunshot.
In a moment, the young man's life was cut short in front of his friends.
This gang strategist thought his cunning and influence would protect him from the law, but he miscalculated. Investigators gathered all the evidence, each piece pointing to the gang leader. The defense tried to drag out the process, but the undeniable evidence and numerous testimonies led to a harsh sentence. 99 years in prison without parole. This case reminded the city of San Antonio that even the most cunning criminals cannot escape justice. A question lingered in the air. How many more like him think they can outsmart the law? The answer awaits you in the next story. Vaze, a terrifying symbol of cruelty. Spring in Massachusetts brought not only blooming gardens, but also the terror spread by Vaze. His name instilled fear, just like the tattoo 666 on his forehead. He was a man who embodied chaos, using his gang for intimidation, kidnappings, and murders. His goal? To silence anyone who dared oppose him. Vaze feared nothing except one thing, the law, and as it turned out, that fear was justified. "He took everything from us," said the trembling voice of a mother whose son vanished after daring to testify against Vaze's people. Months later, his body was found in the woods, one of many tragedies linked to Vaze. Kai sat as if every word meant nothing to him. His lawyer tried to convince the court that all the evidence was circumstantial, that witness testimonies were contradictory, and that this was all an attempt to scapegoat Vaze for the crimes of his gang. But no one believed those words. When the prosecutor spoke, the room fell silent. It was the climax, describing the night Kai personally carried out the execution of one of his former lieutenants who dared to leave the gang. Witnesses claimed that Vaze, with cold determination, ended the man's life. His charred body was found chained to a metal chair. It became a symbol of Vaze's power, a brutal, demonstrative death for anyone who dared betray him. The judges listened to the story as if it were a scene from a horror movie, but the terrifying part was that it was real. Every word sent chills down the spines of those present.
When the judge was about to announce the sentence, Vaze tilted his head slightly and looked directly into his eyes.
He didn't ask for mercy. He stared as if he knew something no one else did. The room went still. Life in prison. The judge's voice sounded with a heavy finality, and in that moment, Vaze smirked. Ronnie O'Neil, a tragedy of his own making. If ever a book is written about those who destroyed their own lives and the lives of others, Ronnie O'Neil's name would be on the first pages. This man didn't just choose a life of crime, he went to the unthinkable lengths of destroying his own family to avoid punishment for his dark deeds. He thought he could outsmart fate, but reality turned out to be far more cruel. His crimes shocked even the most hardened investigators. After his arrest, O'Neil clung to the illusion of his untouchability. He was sure his brutal reputation and manipulation skills would let him walk free once again. He tried to intimidate intimidate witnesses and put on dramatic displays in court, thinking his madness would confuse justice. But every step only brought him closer to his downfall. The evidence presented in court was too strong, the witness testimonies too convincing. Each day of the trial turned into an agony for O'Neil, where his plans fell apart one by one. And when the sentence was announced, life in prison without parole, there was silence. No one cried, no one shouted. The only sound in the courtroom was a deep sigh of relief, as if justice itself had finally prevailed.
Ronnie O'Neil's story serves as a stark reminder that even those who have sunk into the depths of evil,
who relied on their influence and the fear they instilled in others, cannot escape justice. The system broke him, just as he had broken his own life and the lives of those close to him. But this is not the end. What awaits other criminals who still believe that power and fear will save them? MS-13, Trial of the Kings of Terror. MS-13 is not just a gang name, it's a name that instills fear even from a distance. Worldwide, this criminal syndicate has become synonymous with brutality, ruthlessness, and total terror. Their methods were both simple and monstrous: eliminate anyone standing in the way of their criminal interests. Whether it was drugs, smuggling, or contract killings, nothing was sacred to them. Even the most seasoned police officers sometimes couldn't believe the scale of the cruelty with which MS-13 operated. But what was the price of this bloody empire? The answer came when the leaders of MS-13 faced trial. These men were used to believing their power knew no limits. They controlled the streets, intimidated witnesses, and even tried to influence judges. But this time they had to face reality. Mountains of evidence and witness testimonies shattered their illusions of untouchability. Every time the details of their crimes were read out in court, a cold horror filled the air. None of them could escape justice. The life sentences that followed were more than just punishment. They sent a loud signal to everyone who had suffered at their hands. MS-13 lost their crown, becoming a symbol that justice can reach even those who live by the laws of chaos and violence. But the fight isn't over. This is just one victory in the long war against crime. What lies ahead? Gang leaders of South Africa, the end of legends. For years, gangs in South Africa were symbols of fear and terror, holding entire neighborhoods in an iron grip. The leaders of these groups, confident in their invincibility, extorted money, intimidated, and eliminated anyone who dared stand in their way. They saw themselves as kings of their territories, answerable to neither law nor morality. Their legends were built on the blood of the innocent, and their power was fueled by fear. One of the most influential leaders, Hendrik Bonesnapper van Rooyen, embodied all this terror. His name was on the lips of everyone living in the Cape Town area. Bonesnapper wasn't just ruthless, he was a master of psychological terror, forcing people to pay for protection, which was nothing more than ensuring his men wouldn't ruin their lives. He controlled the fates of those on his turf, and it seemed that justice would never catch up to him. But like everyone who believed themselves above the law, Van Rooyen was not eternal. His fear-based criminal empire began to crumble when the police managed to infiltrate an agent into his inner circle. The special operation lasted months, but the climax came with the nighttime arrest of Van Rooyen and his close associates. His trial became a true sensation. In the courtroom sat both his victims and those who had feared him for years. When the judge delivered the sentence, 175 years in prison, people wept not only with joy, but because their nightmare had finally ended. This wasn't just the end of a legend, it was a symbol of justice's triumph over terror. But is this the end for all leaders of the criminal world? Life sentences for gang leaders, the end of an era of impunity. While South African gang leaders were losing control of their territories, criminal empires around the world were also shaking. For years, gang leaders believed they could intimidate not only the streets, but the justice system itself. Their influence seemed all-powerful. Even judges and prosecutors feared them. But no system of terror can last forever, and the wave of justice swept over the heads of crime syndicates in Africa and other parts of the world. In one such courtroom drama, a gang leader known as Maxwell the Butcher Sibanda finally faced trial. This man, fascinated by occult rituals, held devilish ceremonies before every crime, believing that justice would never touch him. His connections with corrupt officials, his status in the criminal world, all of it fueled his belief in his own invulnerability. But when the trial began, it became clear that even the darkest rituals couldn't protect him from justice. Witnesses came forward one after another, recounting stories of fear and violence, while the defense attorneys were powerless. Maxwell sat in court, in disbelief at what was happening. When the sentence was announced, life in prison without the possibility of parole, it was more than just a punishment for one man. It was the collapse of the myth that criminal leaders could rule the world with impunity. This story is just one part of the global battle against crime, but sometimes the most shocking crimes involve not just the leaders, but their innocent victims. Crimes that shocked the world, innocent victims of gang wars. Sometimes the cruelty of the criminal world shocks even those who are used to living under constant threat. However, there are moments that become turning points for entire communities when the world finally realizes the depth of human brutality. One such moment was the killing of a small child during a gang shootout in 2019. This tragedy shocked everyone, from ordinary citizens to the most hardened police officers. On August 18th, gangs had a confrontation in a residential neighborhood where innocent families were going about their daily lives. One wrong shot, one bullet intended for an enemy, struck a child playing in the yard. This incident became a symbol of the devastating consequences of gang wars. The investigation into the case turned into a landmark event for the whole country. The killers were sentenced to life imprisonment, and the trial itself became a reminder that brutal actions will never go unpunished. But even in such grim cases, the courts demonstrate that justice can prevail. These sentences not only punished the criminals, but also brought some solace to those who lost their loved ones. Let's take a look at the relentless justice of Los Angeles. The relentless justice of Los Angeles, a lesson for all. Los Angeles, with its glittering Hollywood lights and golden beaches, hides in its shadows a dark world of criminal syndicates that have held the city in fear for decades. In this city, where life can change in an instant, different rules apply. One of the most feared players in this arena was Pedro Espinosa, a charismatic and ruthless leader of a criminal clan who easily recruited street youth, turning them into combat squads. Espinosa was almost a legend in criminal circles. He was feared, obeyed, and he bathed in luxury built on blood and drugs. He felt untouchable, like a king who believed no one could threaten him. But as history shows, the higher you rise, the harder you fall. Pedro's arrest was a lightning bolt out of the blue. It wasn't just the arrest of a gang leader, it was the collapse of an entire empire, a shock to those who thought he was invincible. His trial became a dramatic spectacle, where Espinosa felt his power crumbling before his eyes for the first time. The judge, delivering the sentence, seemed to strip him of all the power he had amassed over the years. The life sentence wasn't just a punishment for Pedro, it was a signal to everyone who ever thought that crime could go unpunished. The courtroom that day became an arena of true justice, where even the most powerful criminal boss couldn't escape his end. But Pedro's story is not just the end of one criminal empire, it's the beginning of a new phase in the fight against crime. And if anyone thought that this verdict marked the end, they were gravely mistaken. The harsh sentence against Espinosa not only awakened Los Angeles, but also those who still believed in their own invulnerability. In another corner of the city, in dark alleys and abandoned buildings, criminal leaders began to realize that their days were numbered, and one of them faced an even harsher truth. Criminal leaders who lived by their own brutal laws long believed in their untouchability, but justice is relentless. Trials, revelations of their dark deeds, and harsh sentences have shattered the myth that power and fear can protect them from reckoning. These stories have become a reminder to the whole world that no criminal syndicate, whether in America, South Africa, or elsewhere, can escape the law.
Let this be a lesson to all those who continue to believe that crimes can go unpunished.
And yes, if you love interesting stories, know how to write scripts, edit, or voice videos, then follow the link to the Telegram bot in the description. I'd be happy to collaborate. Thanks for watching.